They ripped her dress in broad daylight, stripping away her dignity before a stunned crowd. But what they didn't know was that the woman they humiliated was a lawyer with the power to bring their entire precinct crashing down. And with one phone call, she lit the fuse that would burn them all. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. Saturday mornings in Redwood Falls had a rhythm that felt older than the town itself. The weekly farmers market stretched across Main Street, where rows of folding tents glowed with the soft colors of handmade signs. Wooden crates overflowed with peaches so ripe their sweetness lingered in the air. The hum of bees circled around glass jars of amber honey lined in perfect rows, sunlight catching them like liquid fire. Somewhere near the edge, a man played a battered fiddle, the melody weaving into the chatter of families and the occasional bark of a leashed dog tugging at its owner. Retired couples moved slowly from stall to stall, cradling bags of artisan soaps and jars of strawberry jam. Children clutched paper cones of kettle corn, their fingers sticky, their laughter ringing out above the music. In the middle of it all, Danielle Brooks blended into the crowd with the quiet ease of someone who was both a part of the scene and apart from it. 34 years old, her presence carried a calm confidence that seemed unshakable. She wore a navy summer dress, simple but elegant, its hem brushing against the tops of her sandals. A woven tote bag hung over her shoulder, already heavy with produce, green beans, peaches, and a small bar of lavender soap she had picked up from a vendor she knew by name. Danielle was deliberate in her movements, scanning stalls, smiling faintly at children who bumped into her, nodding to vendors she passed. To anyone else, she looked like another shopper enjoying the morning sun. No one could guess that she was more than what she appeared, or that beneath her calm exterior lay years of experience as an attorney, a former civil rights investigator, and now an undercover operative with a mission. Danielle paused near the flower stall, leaning in to breathe the fragrance of sunflowers arranged in tall buckets. A breeze lifted the edges of her dress, and for a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes, savoring the simplicity of being unnoticed. For someone who had seen courtrooms filled with lies, police reports designed to erase the truth, and families destroyed by silence, this small pocket of ordinary life was precious. She had almost forgotten what it felt like. That peace cracked in an instant. A heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder, jarring her forward. Danielle's eyes flew open. She turned to see Officer Richard Clean, his face red as if he'd already been shouting before he spoke. He was broad, stocky, his uniform straining at the seams, his jaw clenched tight. Behind him stood Deputy Halden, leaner, quieter, his pale eyes darting uneasily between Danielle and the crowd beginning to turn their heads. "What's in the bag?" Clean barked, his grip tightening. Danielle stiffened. "Excuse me?" "The soap," Clean snapped. "I saw you take it." She blinked, incredulous. Slowly, she reached into her tote and pulled out the bar, still wrapped in brown paper stamped with the vendor's name. Alongside it, she unfolded the thin slip of paper, her receipt. She held both out calmly. "I bought this. You can ask the vendor." Halden shifted on his feet. But Clean didn't even glance at the receipt. His face burned hotter. "Step aside, now." Danielle's calm explanation did nothing to slow Officer Clean. His hand shot down, yanking the tote from her grip so violently that peaches rolled out across the pavement, bumping against ankles and scattering under vendor tables. The sound of fruit thudding on asphalt made several shoppers turn their heads. Conversations hushed. "I said step aside," Clean repeated, louder now. His chest puffed out like the authority in his voice alone could drown out reason. Danielle bent to retrieve her receipt, which had slipped from her fingers in the scuffle, but Clean slapped it out of her hand. The thin paper fluttered to the ground, ignored. "Sir," Danielle said firmly, her voice even, "you're making a mistake. That soap was purchased. You can check the register. You can check." Her words cut short as Clean seized her wrist. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother shielded her child's eyes. A vendor dropped a bag of tomatoes, red spheres splitting open on the concrete. "Hands behind your back," Clean ordered. Deputy Halden stepped forward, hesitant. His eyes flicked to the people gathering, to the phones beginning to rise. Maybe we should do it, Clan snapped, shutting him down. Danielle's voice remained steady, though the iron in her tone was unmistakable. I have proof of purchase. You're ignoring it. You're ignoring witnesses. This is unlawful. Her refusal to break seemed to only ignite Clane further. He jerked her arm behind her back, hard enough that she stumbled against the flower stall. Buckets tipped, water spilling across the pavement, stems snapping underfoot. Then came the moment that froze the market in collective horror. As Clane yanked, the fabric of Danielle's navy dress tore with a loud, sickening rip. A jagged seam split down the side, exposing her thigh and the pale fabric of her undergarments. Gasps became shouts. An elderly man muttered a prayer. A toddler began to cry. Danielle froze for half a second, her body rigid, but her eyes burned. She pulled against Clean's grip, not thrashing, not fighting, but resisting with dignity and tact. You have no right, she said, her voice low and deliberate, cutting through the chaos like steel. Phones captured it all. From across the street, a teenage girl held her device high, live streaming the scene with wide, unblinking eyes. Her camera lens focused in on Danielle's torn dress, the officer's red face, the shocked crowd. Danielle's gaze found the girl through the mess of bodies. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. Danielle gave the faintest nod, subtle, deliberate. It was enough. The girl steadied her hand, ensuring every second was recorded, broadcasted, immortalized. Clean shoved Danielle forward, her sandals flinging off as her knees scraped against the pavement. She winced but never cried out. Her hair, once neatly pinned in a low bun, slipped loose in strands across her face. Still, her voice carried above the noise. You're humiliating me in front of children. You will answer for this. The market had gone silent, save for the scrape of Danielle's knees on the ground and the harsh sound of Clean's breathing. Even the fiddle player had stopped mid-song, his bow hanging frozen in the air. All eyes were fixed on the woman in the navy dress, her dignity shredded in front of neighbors and strangers alike. Deputy Halden crouched to snap the cuffs around her wrists, but his hands trembled. He glanced at her face and saw something he did not expect: calm. Not despair. Not even rage. Her lips pressed into a firm line, her eyes sharp as glass. She was watching him, not pleading, but weighing him, measuring him. Halden's throat tightened, but he clicked the cuffs shut anyway. Up, Clem barked, tugging her by the arms. Danielle rose unsteadily, her bare feet meeting the hot pavement. Her sandals lay discarded behind her, one wedged beneath a vendor's cart. A boy no older than 10 picked it up and held it to his chest as if keeping it safe. His mother pulled him back quickly, but the boy's wide eyes stayed locked on Danielle, as though he knew instinctively this moment was something bigger than he understood. From the other side of the market, voices rose. She didn't steal anything, a woman shouted. That's Danielle Brooks, she runs the reading program at the school. Another joined in, louder. I saw her pay for it. You're hurting her for nothing. But Clean pushed forward, dragging her toward the waiting cruiser. The rip in her dress swayed with each step, revealing too much with every movement. Danielle felt the heat of shame burning against her skin, but she forced her chin higher, refusing to fold into the humiliation. A man with gray hair stepped into the officer's path, arms wide. Stop this nonsense, he demanded. This is wrong. Clean shoved him aside without hesitation, the older man stumbling against a fruit stand. Apples toppled in a cascade of red and gold. Shoppers gasped, but no one else moved forward. Fear held them still, rooted in place. Danielle's voice cut through the air one final time before she was forced into the back seat of the cruiser. You're making a mistake, she said again, deliberate, every word sharpened. This will not stay buried. The teenage girl live streaming zoomed in on her face as those words fell. The clip would later be replayed millions of times, dissected on news channels, quoted in headlines. But in that moment, it was only a quiet prophecy. The car door slammed shut. Danielle sat upright, hands cuffed, hair disheveled, dress torn. Around her, the farmer's market remained frozen, vendors and families staring at the dust left behind. No one moved to pack up their stalls. No one resumed the cheerful chatter that had filled the morning. It was as if time itself had stalled, weighed down by what they had all just witnessed. A woman whispered to her husband, voice shaking. They tore her dress like she was nothing. And in that silence, every bystander knew this wasn't an arrest. It was a public stripping of dignity, one they would never forget. The cruiser door slammed shut, sealing Danielle inside. The air smelled of sun-baked vinyl and old coffee. Heavy and suffocating, she shifted against the stiff plastic seat, her wrists raw from the cuffs, her back pressed against the door. Sweat beaded along her hairline, trickling down the side of her face. The heat was unbearable, yet her eyes stayed fixed and steady. Calm had settled over her like armor. Through the window, she could still see the farmer's market frozen in shock. People lingered at the edges of the lot, phones held high. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering explanations they couldn't believe themselves. Her sandals remained somewhere back on the asphalt, but she didn't look for them. They were gone, and dignity had been ripped away with them. Clean dropped into the driver's seat with a grunt, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the mirror. His face glowed red, sweat clinging to his temples, though it wasn't the heat alone. His anger seemed to feed him, pulsing through the veins that stood out on his neck. He adjusted his belt with a jerk, then twisted in his seat to sneer at her. "You think you're slick, don't you?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Walking around with your little bag, acting like you belong here. Shoplift and play the victim. That's the game." Danielle tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was a case file laid open before her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even blink. "I had a receipt," she said quietly. Clean let out a harsh laugh, slapping his palm against the steering wheel. "Receipt? Please, you people always have a story, always an excuse. Thought you'd get sympathy, didn't you? Thought crying in front of a crowd would scare me off." Her jaw tightened, but she refused to take the bait. The memory of the torn fabric brushing against her legs, the weight of all those eyes, pressed in on her chest. Yet she drew a slow, steady breath, letting her silence speak louder than his shouting. Halden climbed into the passenger seat, his movements slower, less sure. He adjusted the mirror, his eyes flickering toward her reflection before darting away again. He didn't speak, but his hands fidgeted on his lap, betraying unease. Danielle leaned forward slightly, her voice low, deliberate, carrying the weight of certainty. "Call your supervisor," she said. Clean twisted back to glare at her, his lip curling. "What?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Call your supervisor, now." The pause that followed was electric. Even Halden shifted in his seat, glancing sideways at his partner. "You think you're in some kind of movie?" Clean barked, trying to shake off the chill her words carried. "Sit back. Shut your mouth." But Danielle leaned back against the seat, her eyes narrowing, the steel in her tone unbroken. "You're going to regret this." The words hung in the air like smoke. "You're going to regret this." Danielle's voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made Halden's fingers pause mid-tap against his knee. For the first time since they laid hands on her, his eyes lingered on the mirror, studying her reflection. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't begging. She sat steady, posture unbowed, wrists bound yet spirit unbroken. Something unsettled him. Clean, on the other hand, barked a laugh that came out more forced than amused. He jammed the keys into the ignition, twisting hard until the engine roared. "Big words from someone in cuffs," he muttered, shifting into gear. He leaned back, sneering over his shoulder. "You think threatening me is going to change anything? You're just another thief who thought she was smarter than the law." Danielle tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I told you. I had a receipt." The reminder struck sharper than expected, because at that exact moment, something slammed against the cruiser's window. Both officers flinched. On the passenger side, a man in a green apron stood with his palms pressed flat against the glass. He was panting, sweat soaking his shirt. In his hand, he clutched a roll of paper, his voice carried through the glass, muffled but urgent. "She bought it from me," he shouted. "I sold it to her. This is her receipt." Halden's head turned, his brows knitting together, uncertainty flickering across his face. But Clean exploded, slamming his palm against the horn to drown the man out. "Back off!" he shouted through the window. "Get out of the way!" The vendor didn't budge. He shoved the slip of paper against the glass, flattening it so even Danielle could read the ink through the reflection. It was the same lavender soap, time-stamped, signed, indisputable. Danielle's eyes locked on it, then lifted slowly to Clean's face. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. "Drive!" Clean snarled, his voice cracking with frustration. Halden shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing the gear stick, though he wasn't the one behind the wheel. His eyes darted between the vendor's frantic gestures and Danielle's calm, steady composure. He knew what was happening. Everyone outside knew too, and yet he stayed silent, trapped between conscience and command. Clean yanked the wheel, backing the cruiser up sharply. The vendor stumbled away, nearly losing his footing. People shouted, phones lifted higher, voices rising in protest. The sound filled the lot, buzzing like a swarm closing in. Danielle leaned her head against the seat, closing her eyes for a moment, as if memorizing the rhythm of it all. The outrage, the disbelief, the witnesses who would not be silenced. When she opened her eyes again, she caught Halden's reflection in the mirror. He looked back at her, his jaw tight, his chest rising with shallow breaths. A crack had appeared, faint but undeniable. The cruiser jerked forward, lurching out of the lot as shouts echoed behind them. Danielle's body swayed with the motion, the cuffs biting into her wrists as the vinyl seat stuck to her skin. She forced her shoulders back, refusing to let the image of her torn dress, her bare feet, or the laughter she'd overheard from bystanders be the last impression of her strength. She sat upright, every line of her posture a quiet defiance. Behind them, the farmers' market erupted. Vendors abandoned their stalls, peaches and flowers forgotten, as clusters of people replayed the chaos on their screens. Clips began shooting through the airwaves faster than the cruiser could turn the corner. The girl who had live-streamed from the front row now had hundreds of viewers, her comments section filling with gasps, curses, and questions. Another angle surfaced seconds later, captured from the jam vendor's stall, showing Clean ripping the bag from Danielle's shoulder and scattering her fruit across the ground. The sound of the fabric tearing made people wince even through their headphones. Inside the car, Halden's phone buzzed on his lap. He glanced at the notification and quickly turned it face down, but not before Danielle noticed the flicker of alarm in his eyes. He had already seen the first clip. He knew the world was watching. Clean, oblivious or pretending to be, gripped the wheel tighter. His knuckles whitened as he accelerated, muttering under his breath, "Think you can embarrass me in front of all those people? Think you can make me look like a fool?" His voice was thick with pride, wounded more than reason. Danielle let the silence stretch until his words died out. Then she leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but heavy enough to fill the car. "It isn't me making you look like a fool," she said. "It's you, and everyone can see it." Clean's jaw flexed, his ears burning. He wanted to snap back, to silence her, but he couldn't drown out the faint, persistent buzz of notifications coming from Halden's phone, or the chorus of shouts still echoing faintly outside as they sped away. Halden adjusted the mirror again, his eyes locking with Danielle's reflection. For a heartbeat, the air in the cruiser felt different, not like predator and prey, not like criminal and officer, but like something shifting, a balance tipping where one truth could no longer be buried. Danielle didn't break eye contact. She didn't need to, because even before the cruiser cleared the market's edge, the story was already out. Dozens of videos spreading, reshared, amplified, headlines forming in real time. Police tear dress of black woman at farmer's market. Humiliation in broad daylight. Witnesses cry foul. The fuse had been lit, and nothing Clean or Halden did in that cruiser could extinguish it. The station doors swung open, and Danielle was hauled inside like evidence on display. Her wrists were bound, her dress torn, her bare feet slapping against the tiled floor. The front desk officer looked up from his paperwork and frowned at the sight. For a moment, the pen in his hand stilled, but then he masked his expression and looked away. Clean marched her forward, his grip digging into her arm. "Caught shoplifting at the market," he muttered to anyone who would listen. The words carried like smoke, poisonous and sticky. Danielle's head turned slightly. She saw the stares from other officers scattered across the lobby, curious, skeptical, some openly mocking. One younger cop let out a low whistle, smirking. "Guess the literacy lady couldn't read a price tag," he said under his breath. Laughter flickered in the air, short and cruel. Halden walked behind them, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding hers. He seemed less steady than before, the mocking laughter landing like stones against his conscience. They passed through the processing area where a fingerprint scanner sat waiting, its screen glowing sterile blue. Clean shoved her down onto the hard bench, barking at the clerk to get ready. "Make it quick," he growled. "We've got paperwork to fill." The clerk hesitated. "She doesn't look like—" "Do your job," Clean snapped. Danielle lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the tension. "You don't even know who I am." The room quieted for half a beat, but then the sound of boots echoed across the linoleum. Sheriff Raymond Buckley appeared from the hallway, his presence drawing every eye. He was in his 60s, broad-shouldered despite a belly pressing against the buttons of his uniform. His silver crew cut gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his face lined with years of smug certainty. He walked with the slow confidence of a man who believed every room he entered was his to command. "Well now," Buckley said, his tone amused. "What have we got here?" Clean straightened immediately, puffing out his chest like a boy caught in a lie. "Shoplifter at the market. Caused a scene." Buckley's eyes swept over Danielle. His gaze lingered on the torn fabric, the exposed seam of her dress, then lifted to meet her steady stare. He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You're a hard woman to identify, miss?" Danielle didn't flinch. "You didn't even try." Buckley chuckled, the sound low, calculated. "Fiery one, aren't you? Well, we'll sort this out. Emotions get heated in public spaces. Sometimes there are misunderstandings." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Sometimes people forget their place." Danielle's lips curved into the faintest smile, sharp as a blade. "And sometimes, people mistake silence for weakness." The sheriff's smirk faltered for just a moment. Then he straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Get her processed," he ordered. His voice clipped now. "We'll release her once she cools down." But Danielle wasn't interested in cooling down. She was waiting for her moment. And it was almost here. The sheriff turned to leave, but Danielle's voice stopped him in his tracks. "I want my phone call." The demand cut through the room like a bell. Several heads turned. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Buckley looked back over his shoulder, his expression souring. "You're in no position to make demands," Clean sneered, folding his arms. "We'll decide when." Danielle raised her voice, sharper now, unyielding. "It's my legal right. Deny it, and you'll regret it." Halden shifted on his feet, uncomfortable, but Clean barked out a laugh. "You hear that? She thinks she's a lawyer." Danielle's eyes locked on him. "I don't think. I know." The confidence in her tone unsettled even the sheriff. Buckley narrowed his eyes, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't quite solved. Then, with a wave of his hand, he muttered, "Fine. One call. Make it quick." Clean grabbed her arm roughly, dragging her toward the desk phone mounted on the wall. He shoved the receiver into her cuffed hands, smirking. "No funny business? One number? That's it." Danielle ignored him. She dialed slowly, deliberately, each button press echoing in the quiet room. Officers nearby pretended to shuffle papers, but their eyes stayed fixed on her. Halden watched too, his nerves tightening with each ring that pulsed through the receiver. The line clicked. A crisp voice answered, "Justice League Foundation." Every muscle in Danielle's body shifted, her calm composure sharpening into focus. She spoke with precision, her words carrying weight that no one else in the room could understand. "This is Shadow 13, she said. "Activation required. Redwood Falls. Incident code 4D. A pause. Then the voice on the other end replied, steady and sure. "Understood. You're live." Danielle's lips curved faintly. "Yes, Footage is circulating. I've been detained. I need extraction protocol within the hour. We've already seen it, the voice confirmed. Hold your ground. Reinforcements are in motion. She hung up slowly, returning the receiver to its cradle. The room had gone utterly still. Clean stood frozen, confusion twisting his face. What the hell was that? Danielle turned to him, her expression unshaken. That was your mistake becoming permanent. Clem blinked, caught off guard. Halden's mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. He looked pale, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Buckley narrowed his eyes. Who exactly are you? He asked, his voice low, measured. Danielle didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, chains clinking softly, her voice steady as stone. You just arrested the wrong damn woman. The room erupted in low murmurs. Officers glanced at one another, some shifting uncomfortably, others frowning as though trying to piece together what they had just witnessed. The name, the code, the calm certainty in her tone, it didn't sound like a desperate detainee. It sounded like a commander giving orders. Clean's face flushed red, his bravado cracking. You think a little act is going to scare us? Some code words and a fake foundation? Please. He tried to laugh, but it rang hollow. Danielle tilted her head, her gaze cutting straight through him. Check your phones, she said. A young officer near the back, curiosity outweighing fear, pulled his phone from his pocket, his brows furrowed. She's trending, he muttered. He turned the screen toward the others. A video from the farmer's market filled the display, the torn dress, the crowd shouting, the vendor banging on the cruiser's window. The caption beneath it read, Police rip, black woman's dress in Redwood Falls. More phones buzzed in unison, notifications spilling across the room. Within minutes, everyone could see the truth. Multiple angles, multiple voices, and Danielle's calm defiance threaded through it all. Halden's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but the footage was undeniable. His reflection in the live stream was already being dissected by strangers across the internet. His hesitation noted, his silence judged. He swallowed hard, feeling the walls close in. Buckley's jaw tightened. He moved closer to Danielle, lowering his voice to a growl. You think the world seeing this changes anything? I run this precinct. Not Twitter, not whatever shadow group you called. Danielle met his gaze, unflinching. You don't run anything anymore. The footage is out. The clock is ticking. Every second you stall, more people are watching. Her words hit like blows. The sheriff straightened, his calm veneer cracking, and barked at the room. Get her in a cell. Now. Clean gripped her arm, but the force in his hold faltered. Danielle turned her head slightly, her voice low, almost a whisper meant only for him. The world has already seen you tear me apart. Every time you touch me, you dig your own grave deeper. His fingers loosened, despite himself. Halden stepped forward, hesitant. Sheriff? Maybe we should... Quiet. Buckley snapped, cutting him off. But the quiver in his tone betrayed him. Danielle let them argue. Her eyes sweeping the room one last time. Phones lit the space, screens glowing with headlines that multiplied like sparks. She saw fear in some faces, denial in others. But beneath it all, she felt control shifting. Then she smiled, calm, deliberate, chilling. You just arrested the wrong woman, she said again, louder this time, ensuring every ear caught it. The silence that followed wasn't just disbelief. It was the dawning realization that the nightmare they thought they controlled had already escaped into the world, and there was no pulling it back. By the time Danielle's cell door clanged shut, the world outside had already erupted. What began as a handful of shaky recordings from the farmer's market spread like wildfire across social media. The first video, filmed from above the flower stall, showed the exact moment Officer Klin ripped Danielle's tote bag away and peaches rolled across the ground. The sound of her dress tearing followed seconds later, raw and unmistakable. Viewers recoiled, typing furiously in comments. This is assault. Why are they humiliating her? She had the receipt. Within minutes, another clip surfaced, closer, capturing the precise moment Danielle's knee hit the asphalt, and she hissed in pain. The camera shook as the person holding it gasped. The caption read, "This happened in front of kids. Redwood Falls. Do better." That video alone gathered thousands of shares before the precinct even realized it existed. Then came the live stream. Tasha, the teenage girl who had locked eyes with Danielle during the chaos, had broadcast the arrest as it unfolded. The live stream showed the crowd shouting in Danielle's defense, Clenny shoving a bystander aside, and Halden pulling down his sunglasses like he wanted to hide his face. The chat scrolled so fast it was unreadable, filled with anger, disbelief, and calls for justice. By the time the officer's cruiser left the lot, the live stream had been clipped, reposted, and trending nationally. Hashtags bloomed across platforms. Number Justice for Danielle. Number Torn Dress. Number Redwood Falls. Civil rights activists retweeted the footage, celebrities added their outrage, and journalists tagged the precinct demanding comment. Within 2 hours, the videos hit national news aggregators. Commentators replayed the clips side by side, pointing out the receipt lying on the ground, ignored. Inside her cell, Danielle sat quietly on the metal bench, hands resting in her lap, her breathing steady. The thin blanket an officer had tossed at her barely covered the rip in her dress, but she pulled it across her lap anyway, more for their comfort than her own. Her eyes closed for a moment, not to rest but to listen. Beyond the thick gray walls, she could hear the buzz of voices, the ring of phones, the sudden tension that filled the precinct. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had locked her up thinking it would contain her. Instead, every second she spent inside only amplified the story outside. The world wasn't just watching, it was already moving. She opened her eyes, lips curving into the faintest smile. The chain reaction had begun. By mid-afternoon, the Redwood Falls precinct no longer resembled a quiet government building. Reporters clustered at the front steps, microphones and cameras crowding the entrance. Satellite vans lined the street, their dishes pointed skyward. Every door that opened drew a barrage of questions shouted into the air. Was she charged? Why did your officers rip her dress in public? Does Redwood Falls condone humiliating women on camera? The press secretary, a nervous man with sweat clinging to his forehead, tried to hold the line. "We're reviewing the incident," he repeated like a broken record, his voice drowned out by the roar of questions. Each vague answer only fueled the frenzy. Inside, the hallways buzzed with tension. Phones rang without pause. Officers whispered to each other, glancing at the television mounted in the corner of the break room, where national anchors replayed the footage again and again. Some officers avoided looking at the screen altogether. Others cursed under their breath, muttering about media spin. But everyone knew the truth. The images were damning. Sheriff Buckley convened his command staff in his office, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "We're calling this a misunderstanding," he said, slamming his palm against the desk. "That's the line," she resisted. "My deputies used force to maintain order. End of story." Clean stood stiff at the edge of the room, his face still flushed. "She tried to make a scene. She threatened me. That live stream," Buckley cut in, "isn't what matters. What matters is control. We spin it, we stall, and in 2 weeks this town will be talking about something else." Halden hovered near the door, silent. His mind replayed Danielle's words, the quiet certainty in her tone. "You're going to regret this." He hadn't been able to shake the look in her eyes. Or the crowd's reaction when the fabric ripped. Every time the video replayed, he saw his own hesitation in the frame, and shame pressed heavier against his chest. Out front, the noise only grew. Citizens from the farmers' market had come to the precinct steps, holding signs scribbled in haste. "We saw the truth. She had a receipt. Stop the abuse." Their voices mixed with the media's questions, an echo chamber of outrage pounding against the walls. Danielle sat in her cell, her back straight, listening. She could hear it all, the chanting, the muffled shouts of reporters, the hurried footsteps of officers scrambling to manage the chaos. The world was demanding answers, and she knew Buckley would try to bury the truth under excuses. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and whispered to herself, "You've seen the footage. You know what's coming." The precinct could not contain the storm any longer. By late afternoon, the pressure reached a breaking point. Sheriff Buckley, after hours of backroom arguments and frantic phone calls, decided the only way to quiet the frenzy was to release her. No charges, no paperwork, no explanation. Just out the door, as if the day had never happened. 2 officers arrived at Danielle's cell, avoiding her eyes as they unlocked the door. "You're free to go," one muttered. No apology followed. No acknowledgement of the humiliation she had endured. Danielle rose slowly, pulling the thin blanket tighter around the rip in her dress. Her wrists were still marked red from the cuffs, her bare feet cold against the concrete. Yet she walked with unshaken composure, her chin high, every step deliberate. They led her down the hallway, past officers who tried to look busy but couldn't resist glancing at her. Some watched with open discomfort, others with poorly concealed contempt. Halden stood at the end of the corridor. His eyes flicked up as she passed, and for a fleeting second, he met her gaze. His face was pale, conflicted, caught between duty and conscience. Danielle didn't break stride. The front doors opened, and sunlight poured in, flooding the dim hallway with brightness. Beyond the glass, the crowd waited. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust out like weapons. Protesters held up their signs higher, chanting her name now, their voices echoing down the steps. Danielle paused just inside the doors, the officers hovering at her back. She looked out at the crowd, at the lenses capturing every detail of her torn dress and bare feet. She drew in a slow breath and stepped through. The noise swelled instantly. Questions flew. "Do you plan to sue? What happened inside? What do you say to the sheriff's statement?" She stopped at the top of the steps, scanning the sea of faces. The signs. The phones raised high. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm and firm. "You've all seen the footage. You know what happened. And you know what's coming." A hush fell. Brief, but powerful. Reporters scribbled furiously. Protesters erupted in cheers. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing every line of her face. Danielle descended the steps, each stride steady, the crowd parting for her as if compelled. She passed through them like a tide, heads turning, whispers following in her wake. No one reached to touch her, but everyone knew they were witnessing something that could not be buried. She walked on without apology from those who had wronged her, without explanation from those who tried to silence her. She walked out with something greater. The eyes of a nation fixed on her torn dress, and the truth it now represented. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, a cheap effort to cover years of use. The carpet was worn thin near the door, the curtains yellowed with age, and the hum of an old air conditioning unit rattled through the silence. It was not a place anyone would choose for comfort, but for Danielle, it was perfect, forgettable, anonymous. A place where strategy could grow in the shadows. She set her torn tote bag on the chipped dresser and eased herself onto the stiff chair by the desk. The blanket the precinct had thrown at her earlier was folded neatly now, placed aside like a relic of indignity she would not carry forward. For the first time since her release, she allowed herself a deep breath, slow and measured. A knock came at the door. Danielle straightened instantly, her instincts sharp. She opened it to find Eli Warner standing there. He was in his late 30s, lean and wiry, with sharp brown eyes that missed little. A trimmed beard framed his face, and a DOJ badge gleamed discreetly inside his jacket pocket. "You look like hell," Eli said quietly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You should see the other guy," Danielle replied, her voice dry, but her eyes steady. He set a folder thick with papers on the desk. "I pulled what I could before driving down. Internal complaints, civilian reports. You were right about Clean and Halden." Danielle flipped open the folder. Pages spilled out, incident reports stamped, unfounded. Complaints marked, insufficient evidence. signatures looping across, dismissal forms. Like a pattern, her fingers lingered on one report filed by a woman who had accused Glenn of excessive force during a routine traffic stop. Dismissed. Another detailed Halden's involvement in a bar fight where witnesses swore he used his badge to escape consequence. Closed. They bury it all, Eli muttered, pacing the room. Same reviewers, same rubber stamps, 7 years of misconduct, erased, like it never happened. Danielle's jaw clenched as she scanned each sheet. The names blurred into a cycle of silence, each report echoing the same truth. This wasn't about one day at the farmer's market. It was a system designed to protect itself. They thought today would disappear too, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. But this time, they ripped the wrong thread. Eli leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her. You know this isn't just a case anymore. This is war. Danielle didn't look up from the papers. Good. The air conditioner rattled again, filling the silence between them. The room felt less like a motel now and more like a war room, the first stage of something far larger than Redwood Falls. A soft knock came at the door just as Danielle finished stacking Eli's documents into a neat pile. Eli reached instinctively toward his jacket, his fingers brushing the handle of his concealed sidearm. Danielle lifted her hand in calm reassurance before crossing the room. When she opened the door, a tall man in his late 50s stood framed by the dim corridor light. His hair was silver at the temples, his frame broad but tired, and his eyes carried the weight of years lived in silence. He held a manila folder under one arm and raised his free hand cautiously. My name's Marcus DeLay, he said, his voice low but steady. I used to wear the same badge they did. Not anymore. Danielle stepped aside, gesturing him in. Marcus entered slowly, his gaze sweeping the room, as if half expecting a trap. When the door shut behind him, he set the folder on the bed and exhaled. They forced me out 5 years ago, Marcus began, his hands clasped in front of him. Said I was too old, too stubborn. Truth is, I started asking questions they didn't want answered. Danielle pulled out the chair for him, but Marcus remained standing, his presence filling the small space. He opened the folder and began sliding out documents, internal memos, copies of body cam logs, handwritten notes. These are complaints they buried, reports they rewrote, evidence they said didn't exist. His voice roughened. I kept copies before they shut me down. Couldn't let it all vanish. Danielle sifted through the papers. One memo bore Sheriff Buckley's signature, ordering a complaint against Clean to be dismissed as non-credible. Another showed Halden's name tied to an incident involving a teenage boy shoved into a locker, charges dropped overnight. Eli stepped forward, scanning the documents quickly. This is gold, he muttered. Hard copies. They can't claim this is fabricated. Marcus finally sat, his shoulders sagging. I watched them twist the system from the inside. Good officers left, bad ones promoted. I stayed quiet too long. His eyes lifted to Danielle, a mix of shame and hope flickering there. But what they did to you today, that tore it wide open. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Danielle placed a hand on the pile of papers, steady and firm. You did the right thing, Marcus. They tried to bury the truth, but it's here. Every page is a crack in their armor. Before Marcus could reply, Eli's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing. The girl from the market, Tasha, she just uploaded a new clip. Different angle. Danielle leaned closer as Eli opened the video. On the small screen, the footage showed Clean's hand gripping her dress, yanking down deliberately, the fabric ripping clear. Gasps could be heard from the crowd, and Halden's face flashed in the background, uneasy, retreating. Danielle's jaw tightened. Deliberate. No accident. Now the world knows. The motel room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as evidence piled higher on the desk. Danielle flipped through Marcus's documents, Eli's files, and Tasha's new footage again and again, connecting threads others had tried to sever. Each page carried the same signature of corruption. Dismissals, redactions, excuses. Each clip of video revealed the same pattern of arrogance and cruelty. This isn't just negligence, Danielle said finally. her voice low but sharp. It's deliberate, a system built to protect itself. Eli nodded grimly. Buckley signs off. Clean enforces. Halden follows. And the town swallows it because the paperwork says nothing happened. They've been running this game for years. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped together. And now? You think they'll let you walk out of this town alive once they know you're digging this deep? Danielle looked up, her eyes steady. They already tried to strip me in front of the world. If humiliation didn't silence me, what else can they do? The question hung heavy, but her tone carried no fear. She shifted her focus back to the desk, spreading the papers like a map. In one corner, complaints from citizens. In another, body cam redactions. In the middle, the still frame of Tasha's clip, the exact moment Clean's hand tore her dress. She stared at it, her jaw tightening. That tear was never about fabric. Danielle whispered. It was about power, a reminder that they could take dignity and leave nothing but shame. But they forgot something. She tapped the photo. Every hand that tried to silence me left a fingerprint, and now those fingerprints are evidence. Eli set his laptop on the bed, already typing. I'll start building the archive, secure servers, encrypted backups. Once this goes live, there's no taking it back. Marcus looked between them. You're not going to sue them, are you? Danielle's eyes hardened. She stood, pushing back her chair, her presence filling the small room. I'm not here to sue them. I'm here to dismantle them. The words landed with the force of a gavel. Eli stopped typing, staring at her as though the air had shifted. Marcus's lips parted, a slow nod following as if he had been waiting years for someone to speak those words aloud. Danielle placed her hands flat on the desk, leaning over the scattered evidence. They thought ripping my dress would make me small, humiliated, erased. But all they did was rip open the curtain they've been hiding behind. And now, I won't stop until every last piece of rot in this system is dragged into the light. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, fading into the night. Danielle didn't flinch. Her war had begun, and Redwood Falls would never forget her name. The motel room glowed dimly with the light of Danielle's laptop screen. She sat at the desk, her torn dress now replaced with jeans and a plain t-shirt, her hair wrapped neatly in a scarf. Eli leaned against the wall, watching as her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Marcus sat on the bed, silent, his hands folded as though in prayer. For hours, the internet had been screaming her name. Clips, hashtags, and outrage filled every corner of the digital world. But Danielle had remained silent. She knew that when she spoke, it had to be with precision, with clarity, with fire. Now was the time. She opened a blank page and began to type. The words came not from anger but from resolve, each sentence carved with the weight of truth. This isn't just about me. What happened in that market wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last, unless we stop it. This is about every person who has been silenced, humiliated, or told their pain doesn't matter. This is about a system that thrives on shame and silence. Redwood Falls, I see you. America, are you watching? She read it aloud, her voice even but carrying the rhythm of something larger than herself. Eli nodded slowly. That's not a statement. That's a spark. Danielle hit post. The words flew into the digital bloodstream, attaching themselves to the videos already flooding every feed. Within minutes, her message was reshared thousands of times. Within an hour, it trended worldwide. Celebrities quoted it, activists framed it on posters, and teenagers made it their status updates. Across town, the protests began. First, a handful of students from Redwood Falls High marched down Main Street, holding cardboard signs painted with black letters. We saw it. We believe her. They chanted her name, their voices breaking through the sleepy quiet of the town. Then the elders came. Outside the courthouse, a circle of church leaders and retired residents gathered. They did not chant. They prayed. Their voices rose, in hymns, old songs carrying the weight of centuries of struggle. Passers-by stopped to listen. Some joining in, others wiping tears as they recorded the moment on their phones. Vendors from the farmer's market joined next. The soap maker, the jam vendor, even the fiddler who had stopped mid-song that morning. They stood together with handmade signs declaring the truth. She paid. We witnessed. They lied. One man held up a peach in his palm, bruised from the scuffle, as a symbol of what had been stolen from them all. Danielle refreshed her screen, watching the footage roll in live. She saw the students marching, the elders praying, the vendors standing in solidarity. Her words were no longer hers alone. They belonged to the people now, she whispered softly to herself. This is what they feared. By evening, Redwood Falls no longer felt like a quiet town. The local press scrambled to contain the firestorm, pushing out headlines meant to soften the edges. Shoplifting incident sparks misunderstanding. Community divided, after-market arrest. The words bent the truth, framing Danielle as just another troublemaker in a heated moment. But the clips circulating online told a different story, and national media had already seized on it. On one channel, a commentator replayed the footage frame by frame, pointing to the slip of paper on the asphalt, the ignored receipt. That's not shoplifting, she declared. That's humiliation. On another, civil rights lawyers debated the legal consequences, citing precedents, statutes, and the long trail of complaints already surfacing against Klain and Halden. The hashtags surged again, climbing to the top of trending lists. Number Justice for Danielle. Number Receipt in Hand. Number Torn Dress Truth. The local papers tried to bury her under euphemisms, but the nation had decided otherwise. At City Hall, Mayor Ellen Monroe faced the cameras. She wore a tailored blue suit, her silver hair pinned neatly, her expression calm. She stepped to the podium flanked by council members, a statement gripped tightly in her hands. We understand the community's concerns regarding the incident at the Redwood Falls Farmers Market, she began, her voice practiced, deliberate. Our city does not condone unlawful use of force. At this time, we are reviewing all available information. I ask the public to remain patient while a full investigation is conducted. Her words were measured, intentionally hollow. She spoke of patience, of procedure, of review, but not of the woman whose dignity had been ripped away in front of children. Not of the receipt discarded on the ground. Not of the dress torn in public view. Reporters pressed for more. Mayor Monroe, do you condemn the actions of the officers? Monroe shifted, her smile fixed. It would be premature to draw conclusions before the review is complete. Another voice rose. What about the videos already circulating? They show clear misconduct. Her answer came smoothly. Rehearsed. We ask the public not to rush to judgment based on partial evidence. The statement aired on every local station, a soundbite looped across the evening news. But online, the reaction was swift and cutting. Clips of Danielle's calm words, "This isn't just about me," were spliced against Monroe's speech, the contrast glaring. Where Monroe had asked for patience, Danielle had demanded truth. Where Monroe had softened, Danielle had sharpened. In living rooms across the country, viewers shook their heads at the mayor's careful neutrality. They replayed Danielle's video instead, her steady voice resonating deeper than polished talking points ever could. At the motel, Danielle closed her laptop after watching the clip of Monroe's statement. Her expression didn't change, but her silence spoke volumes. Eli muttered from the corner, "She just made you stronger." She just made the Krufer people stronger. The morning after the mayor's hollow speech, Redwood Falls woke to something it hadn't seen in decades. The streets themselves seemed to hum with tension, as if the town had been holding its breath, and now exhaled all at once. Signs sprouted overnight in shop windows. We believe Danielle. Dignity is not optional. Even the old diner on Main Street, a place known for its silence on local controversies, taped a handwritten note to the door. She paid. We saw it. At Redwood Falls High, classes were half empty. Students had walked out, spilling into the street with handmade posters. Some bore Danielle's words in bold letters. This isn't just about me. Others carried simple drawings of a torn dress, a receipt, and a set of broken handcuffs. Teachers stood on the sidewalks, some unsure, others clapping quietly as the kids marched past. Their chants rose in waves, echoing off the brick walls of the school. Justice for Danielle. Justice for all. Elders joined next, gathering outside the courthouse in quiet defiance. They brought folding chairs, Bibles, and worn hymnals. One by one, they began to sing, their voices weaving together like a net cast across the square. The old songs of endurance filled the air, songs their parents had sung in marches long before. Their presence wasn't loud, but it was unshakable, a reminder that what was happening in Redwood Falls was not new. It was history repeating itself, and this time, the town was ready to resist. At the farmer's market, vendors returned to the same stalls where it had all begun. The flower seller arranged her bouquets as always, but beside the blooms sat a cardboard sign, "We stand with Danielle." The fiddler picked up his bow, not to play the jaunty tunes of Saturday mornings, but a solemn melody that drifted across the lot. The soap vendor, the very man whose receipt had been ignored, stood on a wooden crate and raised his voice to the gathered crowd. "I sold her that soap," he declared. "I watched her pay. I watched them ignore it. And I watched them tear her dress like she was nothing. But she is not nothing. She is us, and if they can do it to her, they can do it to any of us." Applause rippled through the crowd, swelling into cheers. People raised their phones, capturing the speech, sharing it instantly. Within the hour, the vendor's words had joined the flood of videos spreading across the nation. Local news outlets tried again to muddy the story. Community tensions escalate after arrest. One headline read, "As though both sides bore equal blame." But national media no longer needed Redwood Falls to tell its own story. Networks replayed clips of the protests, interviews with students, footage of elders praying. Commentators debated the broader implications, connecting Danielle's case to a long chain of systemic abuses. The story was no longer just a local scandal. It was a national reckoning. Danielle watched it all from the motel room, the glow of the screen lighting her face. She didn't smile, not even as hashtags soared higher than before. Her focus wasn't on her own image but on the people who had risen because of it. She leaned back, listening as Eli read off statistics. 500,000 shares in less than 24 hours. 2 senators calling for inquiry. Civil rights groups already drafting letters. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. All this because they tore a dress? Danielle's eyes hardened. Number all this because they thought tearing a dress was enough to silence me. She gestured toward the screen, where images of protests scrolled endlessly. Now they know silence doesn't belong to them anymore. As the hours passed, the chant that had started with students marching grew louder, more unified. Reporters picked it up, amplifying it in headlines. The crowd outside the precinct no longer cried only for Danielle. Their voices carried a broader demand, a truth too long ignored: justice for all. That shift was what mattered most. It was no longer about one woman in a torn dress. It was about every unjust handcuff, every silenced complaint, every file marked unfounded. Danielle had lit the fire, but it was the people who now carried it forward. By nightfall, the streets of Redwood Falls glowed with candlelight. Hundreds gathered, their voices hushed, their flames steady. Some held photos of family members who had endured humiliation at the hands of police. Others carried signs that simply read, "Enough." Together, they sang, prayed, and stood in silence that was more powerful than any chant. Danielle stood at the motel window, looking out at the glow that spread across the town like a constellation. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, but for once, she did not see herself. She saw a movement that had outgrown her name. "This was never mine to keep," she whispered. Eli glanced up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" Danielle turned to him, her voice steady. "It started with me, but it ends with them." Justice for Danielle was never the point. Justice for all Island. Her words settled into the room like stone, immovable and true. Outside, the chant rose again, steady and unrelenting, carrying through the night. Justice for all. The Redwood Falls precinct, once a place of rigid order and unquestioned control, now pulsed with panic. Officers who had strutted confidently through the halls days earlier now moved in hushed tones, their conversations clipped, their glances nervous. The copy machines ran non-stop, not for paperwork but for shredding. Piles of files disappeared into locked drawers or incinerators in the basement furnace. Every keystroke on a computer felt frantic, as if deleting emails and clearing drives could undo what the world had already seen. The break room television replayed the same loop of videos. Danielle's arrest, the rip of her dress, the crowd shouting, the mayor's hollow statement. No one dared change the channel. Some muttered curses at the sight, blaming the media for fanning flames. Others simply stared, silent and pale. One young officer, new to the force, whispered to a colleague, "If this is what they've been doing for years, how long before it lands on all of us?" The colleague only shook his head, fear tightening his jaw. Sheriff Buckley tried to project calm. He stalked through the corridors with a forced air of authority, barking orders to control the narrative and hold the line. But his bluster rang hollow now. Every word was drowned by the sound of the crowd outside, chanting, their voices seeping through the station walls like an inescapable tide. Officer Richard Clean had gone scarce. He showed up late, left early, avoided eye contact. When he did appear, his face was twisted with a simmering defiance. He muttered about outsiders meddling and cameras ruining good police work. But even those who had once laughed along fell quiet now. They all knew his name was etched into every headline, every trending hashtag. Deputy Halden, by contrast, looked like a man unraveling thread by thread. His hands shook as he typed reports. Sweat beaded his forehead when Buckley ordered him to double-check complaint logs. Each time the videos replayed on the television, his reflection appeared in the corner of the frame, hesitating, silent, and the weight of it pressed harder against him. He no longer slept well. Each dream replayed the rip of fabric, the gasps of the crowd, the look in Danielle's eyes when she told him he would regret it. By late afternoon, whispers filled the precinct corridors. Some officers said federal investigators were already circling. Others swore Clarion Shield contractors had been called in to wipe digital records clean. Buckley dismissed the talk, but the shredders kept grinding, and the walls themselves seemed to sweat with the pressure of secrets trying to stay buried. Halden sat at his desk, staring at a half-finished report. His pen hovered above the paper, but his mind wasn't on the words. It was on the truth he had watched with his own eyes, truth that refused to be silenced inside him any longer. And as the chants outside grew louder, he knew something had cracked. Halden couldn't focus on the paperwork in front of him. Every word blurred, every signature looked like a forgery. Every box he checked felt like complicity. The chants outside justice for all hammered through the walls, each syllable a reminder of the silence he had chosen. He pulled his phone from his pocket, staring at the screen. His thumb hovered over Danielle's live stream, replayed endlessly across feeds. He had watched it a dozen times, not for her words, but for his own reflection. The flicker of doubt in his eyes, the hesitation that millions had already seen, that hesitation had become his curse. It haunted him more than the act itself, because it revealed the truth. Deep down, he knew it was wrong. And still, he had done nothing. That night, long after the precinct lights dimmed, Halden walked to the evidence room under the guise of filing. He slid open a drawer and pulled out a stack of body cam logs. His hands trembled as he tucked several files into a plain folder, slipping it under his jacket. It wasn't courage that pushed him, it was survival. If the system fell, he refused to go down as silent. By dawn, an encrypted email arrived in Danielle's secure inbox. No sender name, only a note. More exists. They bury it nightly. Look at Buckley's signatures. Look at Clarion Shield. Attached were 3 files, 2 complaints against Clean dismissed as insufficient evidence, and 1 redacted video clip showing Halden himself in the background, visibly pulling back during the farmer's market scuffle. When Danielle opened the files, Eli leaned over her shoulder. "It's him," he said, recognizing Halden's handwriting on one of the forms. Danielle's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. The crack is widening. Hours later, another piece of the puzzle arrived. This time, not from inside the precinct, but from the hospital. A young nurse, still in her scrubs, met Danielle behind the dumpsters by the ER loading dock. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her eyes carried the weight of conviction. "I heard them," the nurse said. "Clean and Halden, in the break room. They were laughing." Danielle's jaw tightened. Laughing about what? The nurse's throat worked as she forced the words out. "About the way your dress tore," Clean said. "Bet she's never been that exposed in her life." Halden didn't laugh. He said you had the look of someone who thought she was untouchable. They didn't sound like they regretted anything. They sounded proud. Danielle exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "You're brave to tell me this, but they'll come after you if they know." The nurse shook her head. "I couldn't keep it in. My mother told me silence is its own crime. I won't be part of theirs." Danielle pressed a hand to the nurse's shoulder. "Then you're part of the cure." The rot inside the precinct was no longer a rumor. It was testimony. And it was growing louder. The motel room had become more than a refuge. It was now a command center. Papers spread across the desk, screenshots pinned to the wall, USB drives stacked like ammunition. Eli hunched over his laptop, his fingers moving quickly, decrypting the files Halden had sent. Marcus leaned against the window frame, watching the parking lot, eyes sharp for any sign of pursuit. Danielle sat at the center, scanning each new document as if she were dissecting the anatomy of corruption itself. "This isn't just about Clean and Halden," Danielle murmured, tapping one page with her finger. "Look here, Clarion Shield." The private contractor's name appeared again and again in Buckley's correspondence. Payments routed to them for data support and security analytics. In truth, they had been providing surveillance beyond the law. Scraping phone records, planting bugs, feeding information directly into Buckley's hands. One document even mentioned a directive labeled Redfall, authorizing high-visibility arrests of certain profiles deemed problematic to public order. Eli shook his head. "This isn't policing. This is targeting." Danielle's voice hardened. "It's control through humiliation." She flipped to another set of documents, these bearing a different signature, Judge Harold Hawthorne. Cold dread settled over the room. Danielle knew that name. She had crossed paths with him during her DOJ years, his rulings notorious for dismissing civil rights suits before they ever reached trial. Now, his signature appeared at the bottom of multiple authorizations, rubber-stamping Clarion Shield surveillance requests, dismissing citizen lawsuits against Redwood officers, even sealing complaints from public records. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "And there's your answer." Every time someone tried to fight back, Hawthorne made sure it died in court. Danielle's eyes burned as she read. "This isn't local rot. This is statewide. A network. Police, private, contractors, judges all feeding each other." The room fell into silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on them. What had begun as a torn dress in a market was now revealed as a thread tied to an entire system of corruption, carefully constructed and guarded by those in power. Danielle closed the folder and looked at Eli and Marcus. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. "We're not fighting a precinct anymore. We're fighting an empire." Eli leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then we'll bring it down the same way we started. One file, one video, one truth at a time." Danielle nodded. The chant from outside drifted faintly through the night air. Justice for all. She clenched her fists, her vow burning hotter than ever. "They thought they stripped me of dignity," she said. "But what they really did was strip themselves of cover. And now, we show the world exactly how deep their rot goes." The motel room was silent, except for the hum of Eli's laptop and the steady beat of Danielle's breath. She sat at the desk, a small desk lamp throwing a pool of light across her face. Before her lay the torn piece of fabric from her dress, folded and refolded since the day at the market. Tonight, it wasn't a scar. Tonight, it was evidence. Danielle reached forward, positioning her phone against a stack of books. The red light blinked to life. Within seconds, the live stream opened to an audience that climbed into the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. the number ticking upward faster than she could process. She didn't look at the count, she looked at the lens, her eyes calm, unflinching. "I want to talk to you," she began, her voice steady. "Not as an attorney. Not as someone who worked in the Department of Justice. Not even as the woman you saw humiliated in that video. I want to talk to you as a citizen, as a human being, as someone who refuses to stay silent." She lifted the torn fabric slowly into the frame, letting it hang from her fingers. The chat exploded with messages, hearts, angry faces, cries for justice. Danielle didn't blink. "This is what they thought would erase me," she continued. "A ripped dress, a public humiliation. They believed shame would silence me. But it didn't. Instead, it showed the world exactly what lives beneath the badge in Redwood Falls." Her words echoed through living rooms, across college dorms, through offices where workers huddled around screens. In churches, in bars, in homes, people leaned closer to hear her. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her calm carried more weight than rage ever could. "I'm not asking you to fight for me," she said. "I'm asking you to fight for yourselves. For your daughters. For your sons. For your neighbors who are told to swallow humiliation just to survive another day. This isn't justice. This is abuse. And it ends when we stand together." By the time she ended the live stream, the viewership had reached nearly 2 million. Clips spread instantly, remixed with the videos from the market, her words stitched together with the chant already rising outside. Justice for all. When Danielle stepped to the window, she froze. Outside the precinct, thousands of people stood shoulder to shoulder, not chanting, not shouting, but silent. Their candles flickered in the night, a sea of light stretching down the street, silent protest, silent fury. The image carried more weight than any speech. The world was watching Redwood Falls transform into a battlefield, not of violence, but of unyielding truth. Danielle whispered, almost to herself. "They tried to strip me. And now, the people stripped them of silence." Inside the precinct, Sheriff Buckley paced like a caged animal. The silent protest outside unnerved him more than chants ever could. The people weren't shouting. They were waiting, watching, judging. His staff looked to him for direction, but for the first time in years, his voice carried no authority. "Get me a statement drafted," he barked. "We'll say, the footage doesn't tell the whole story. We'll push that she resisted arrest, make her out as an agitator planted by outsiders." The press officer scribbled notes reluctantly, his hand shaking. Everyone in the room knew it was useless. The videos had already been dissected by experts, frame by frame, exposing the deliberate tear, the discarded receipt. But Buckley clung to denial like a lifeline. Then, the leak hit. Screens across the country lit up with grainy body cam footage, audio unmistakable. Buckley's own voice filled the air, low and gruff. "Rip her credibility before the feds show up. Paint her as unstable. That's the play." The room froze. Phones buzzed as the clip spread across platforms, picked up by national outlets within minutes. Buckley's face drained of color. He slammed his fist against the desk, shouting, "That was taken out of context." But no one listened. His words weren't just an indictment of strategy. They were an indictment of intent. Outside, the silence of the crowd cracked into a murmur, then a roar. The chant rose like thunder, no longer just justice for all but Buckley resign. The courthouse steps shook with the force of their voices. Danielle watched from the motel, her arms folded across her chest. She hadn't leaked the footage someone inside had. The fact made it more powerful. This wasn't just her war anymore. The rot was turning on itself. An hour later, black SUVs rolled into Redwood Falls, their tinted windows reflecting the candlelight of the crowd. Federal agents stepped out in dark suits, their jackets marked only by discreet DOJ badges. They entered the precinct with quiet authority, carrying sealed boxes and digital forensics kits. Officers scrambled, shredders whirring louder, screens going dark as hard drives were yanked from walls. Buckley tried to block their path, his voice booming. "You don't have jurisdiction here. This is my department." The lead agent, calm and stone-faced, handed him a federal warrant. Not anymore. Within minutes, servers were seized, cabinets emptied, stacks of shredded paper bagged as evidence. The agents moved with precision, leaving no corner untouched. The sound of the shredders died as one officer unplugged the machine and slumped into his chair. Defeated. Danielle stood at the window, watching the silent crowd cheer as boxes were carried out of the precinct. The fortress that had once stood untouchable was being gutted before their eyes. "They're not just losing control," she murmured to Eli. "They've already lost it." The news broke just before dawn. A headline so shocking it cut through even the roar of Redwood Falls. Clarion Shield CEO found dead in Maryland estate. Apparent suicide. The article described him slumped in his garden, a gun beside him, no note, and discovered. Authorities called it self-inflicted, but Danielle read the story twice, then closed her laptop with a snap. "No," she whispered. "That's not suicide. That's erasure." Eli leaned against the wall, rubbing a hand over his beard. Too convenient. He was the link. He had the contracts, the memos, the digital trails. With him gone, the paper trail looks like it ends here, Marcus muttered from the bed. Or they want us to think it ends here. Danielle stared at the torn fabric on the desk. The symbol that had carried her this far. "They underestimated me once. They think this death will bury the truth. But every cover-up is just another confession." Outside, Redwood Falls trembled with unrest. Protesters swelled by the thousands, not only from the town but from neighboring cities. Streets flooded with people, some carrying candles, others holding signs. "Not suicide. Cover-up. We want truth." National cameras captured the growing tide, broadcasting it into every home across the country. Inside the precinct, Buckley clung to denial, repeating the same line to anyone who would listen. "It's a tragedy. Nothing more. This is getting out of hand." But no one believed him anymore. Not the crowd outside, not the federal agents combing through his office, not even the officers who once called him their leader. That night, Danielle went live again. The fabric lay beside her on the table, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. "They tell you it's suicide," she said, her voice calm but carrying iron. "But ask yourself, who benefits from his silence? Who gains when truth dies in a locked estate with no witnesses? This isn't an end. It's proof. Proof that the rot doesn't stop in Redwood Falls. It runs through corporations, courthouses, and boardrooms, and it's terrified of the light." Her words spread like sparks on dry grass. Hashtags exploded. Number not suicide, number cover-up, number justice for all. Cable anchors replayed her statement alongside footage of federal agents hauling evidence out of the precinct, the contrast too stark to ignore. By midnight, Redwood Falls was no longer a town on the map. It was the epicenter of a scandal shaking the nation. The chant of thousands echoed into the night, carried by live streams watched by millions. The nation didn't just watch Redwood Falls burn in scandal, it demanded the fire spread until every hidden rot was exposed. Danielle sat back from the camera, her face unreadable, but her vow unmistakable. The firestorm had begun, and nothing could put it out now. The drive to Reading Lake was shrouded in fog, the trees looming like silent witnesses on either side of the narrow road. Danielle sat in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed ahead, her recorder tucked discreetly in her jacket pocket. Eli drove with both hands tight on the wheel, his jaw set. Neither spoke for miles. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy with anticipation. The cabin appeared at the water's edge, a crooked structure with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered weakly. The gravel crunched under the tires as Eli pulled the car to a stop. They exchanged a single look, no words needed, and stepped out into the damp night air. Danielle approached the door first, knocking firmly. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of water lapping against the shore. Then, a creak. The door opened slowly, revealing Richard Clean. He looked nothing like the officer who had tackled her in the farmer's market. His face was hollow, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. He wore a wrinkled flannel shirt, his socks dirty, his hair matted as if he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, he just stared, his chest rising and falling unevenly. You, he said flatly. Us, Danielle replied. Clean stepped back without resistance, letting them inside. The cabin smelled of whiskey and stale air. Papers littered the table, some official documents, others scribbled notes. A half-empty bottle sat beside an untouched glass. He slumped into a chair, his hands trembling as he reached for the glass but didn't lift it. You already won, Clean muttered. His voice cracked. Why are you here? Danielle remained standing, her presence steady. Because your silence still protects the people who ordered you. You tore my dress, but you weren't acting alone. I want the truth. Clean laughed bitterly, running a hand down his face. The truth? The truth is, I don't sleep anymore. I see your face every time I close my eyes. I hear the crowd. The cameras. The rip of fabric. I thought I was tough. Turns out I'm just a coward who followed orders. Eli moved closer, his voice low. Then stop being a coward. Tell it all. Every detail. Because this doesn't end with you, it ends with the ones who pulled your strings. Clean stared at Danielle, then at the recorder peeking from her jacket. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, she saw the crack in his armor widen. Clean leaned forward, elbows on the table, his face buried in his hands. For a moment he said nothing, just breathed heavily, the weight of his own silence crushing him. Finally, his voice broke through, low and ragged. Buckley gave the order that morning, he said. He told me straight out, make sure she doesn't walk away looking clean, humiliate her, break her if you have to, rip her credibility before the feds sniff around. His words, not mine. Danielle's eyes narrowed. So the torn dress wasn't an accident. Clean shook his head slowly. Number. It was the point. He wanted something that would stick, something that would make her look weak in front of the crowd. He said humiliation lasts longer than bruises. His voice cracked on the last word, shame clawing through him. Eli's jaw tightened. And Clarion Shield? Where do they fit in? Clean let out a bitter laugh. They were the ones feeding us names. Profiles. Lists of so-called troublemakers. They tracked phones, dug up records, even flagged social media posts. Anyone who questioned the department, anyone who spoke too loudly, they handed to Buckley like targets on a silver plate. Danielle leaned closer, her recorder catching every word. And the deputy mayor? Collier? Clean's hands clenched into fists. He signed the contracts. Knew exactly what Clarion was doing. He called it risk management. Said it was cheaper to silence people than fight lawsuits. He got his cut from every contract Clarion pushed through. The room fell into a heavy silence, the truth finally dragging itself into the open. The pieces Danielle had been collecting, Marcus's memos, Halden's leaks, the nurse's testimony, all converged in Clean's confession. This was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was an indictment. Clean finally lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot but steady. You think I don't know what this makes me? I was the hand that did the tearing. The one they'll all remember, but I was just one piece of the machine. And that machine is bigger, darker, meaner than you can imagine. Danielle studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she pressed the recorder onto the table, sliding it closer. Then, let the machine burn. Every word you say tonight helps light the fire. Clean exhaled, a sound caught between relief and despair. Then I'll give you everything. Clean reached for the bottle on the table but stopped short, his hand shaking. Instead, he looked straight at Danielle, his voice trembling but determined. Record it. All of it. If I'm going down, I'm not going alone. Danielle pressed the small recorder's button. The red light blinked alive, and the silence in the cabin thickened. Sheriff Buckley, Clean began, his tone hollow. He orchestrated everything. The humiliation, the targeting, the cover-ups. He told us over and over, credibility is everything. Break their credibility, and you don't need to break their bones. He used Clarion to track people, to mark them before they ever made a move. And we carried out his orders because that's how you survived in Redwood Falls. His hands gripped the edge of the table as he continued, each word pulling another piece of rot into the open. Clarion Shield gave us lists every month. Names, addresses, personal histories. People flagged for being high risk. But they weren't criminals. They were teachers, organizers, mothers who filed complaints, kids who posted about police brutality. They wanted them scared, humiliated, silenced. Danielle sat motionless, her eyes locked on him, every syllable sinking into the recorder. Eli stood at her side, his arms crossed, watching the broken man unravel. And Deputy Mayor Collier, Clean's voice dropped lower, his shame heavy. He signed every deal with Clarion, called it insurance. He profited from it. He bragged once over drinks that he'd built a system where silence paid better than justice. He thought it was genius. Danielle leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. You've just named 3 men, Buckley, Collier, and the CEO of Clarion Shield, who turned Redwood Falls into a hunting ground. Do you understand what you've just given me? Clean's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. Yeah. I've given you the knife to gut the whole beast. And I don't care anymore. I just want it out of me. The recorder clicked off, the silence that followed louder than his confession. Danielle slipped it back into her jacket, her face unreadable. Then you've done more than most ever will, Eli added softly. This isn't redemption, Clean. But it's a start. Clean nodded weakly, as though the act of speaking had left him hollow. By dawn, the file was uploaded to Danielle's encrypted archive. And by noon, its contents spread across national outlets. Headlines screamed of systemic rot. Officer confession. Buckley ordered humiliation. Clarion supplied targets. Collier's name blazed across front pages. But the storm wasn't done. Deputy Halden appeared next, not in a cabin but in a secure office under federal protection. His face pale, his hands trembling, he slid a flash drive across the table to Danielle and Eli. Everything I saved, he whispered. Body cam copies, Clarion meeting logs, internal memos Buckley told us to delete. It's all here. Danielle opened the files on Eli's laptop. Pages of logs, meeting, notes, payments, undeniable proof of collusion. Halden's voice cracked as he spoke. I should have stopped it sooner. But I didn't. So now, I testify. And he did, under oath, behind closed doors at first. Halden laid bare the mechanics of the machine. He confirmed Clean's words, detailed Clarion's monthly target lists, and exposed Collier's signature on every major contract. The network was no longer shadow, it was blueprint, and the backbone of the corrupt empire finally broke. When the testimony leaked, the chant outside the precinct changed once more. It wasn't just justice for all. It was names. Buckley. Clarion. The crowd shouted them like indictments, each syllable a demand for reckoning. Danielle watched from the courthouse steps, the torn fabric still folded in her pocket. For the first time since the market, she allowed herself to close her eyes. Not in relief. In preparation. Because the final blow was near, and she was ready to strike. The courthouse doors swung open to a wall of sound. Protesters lined the steps, their candles still burning even in the daylight, wax dripping onto cardboard signs bearing words like dignity and justice for all. The silence protests had grown into something larger, an unbroken vigil. Some sang softly, others stood with hands joined, but all kept their eyes on the courthouse, where history was about to be written. Inside, the courtroom was overflowing. Every seat was taken, the aisles packed with reporters, activists, and townspeople who had lived under the weight of Redwood Falls for too long. Federal marshals stood at the back, their presence quiet but unmistakable. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the energy carried beyond the walls as live updates streamed through phones and whispered texts. Danielle sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, her expression calm but sharpened with resolve. Eli was beside her, papers stacked neatly in front of him, though they both knew words on a page mattered less now than the truth already echoing through the streets. Across the aisle sat Sheriff Buckley, his once proud shoulders slumped, his face drawn tight. Next to him, Richard Clean avoided everyone's gaze, his suit wrinkled, his hands folded too tightly as though to keep them from shaking. Judge Rhonda Castillo entered, her black robe swaying as she took the bench. The gavel cracked once, silencing the room. This court is now in session. Danielle rose when invited to deliver her closing. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. She stepped forward, her heels steady against the polished floor, and turned to face the judge and, by extension, the nation outside these walls. This case was never about a dress, she said, her voice strong, unwavering. It was about what that torn fabric represented, the ease with which dignity can be stripped away, the casual cruelty of those who believe power makes them untouchable. Words hang, the silence after them deeper than any shout. Then she continued, softer but no less sharp. Every person who has been humiliated, dismissed, or silenced saw themselves in that moment. And this court has the chance to say no more. Judge Castillo leaned forward, her hands folded neatly on the bench. For a long moment she said nothing, letting Danielle's words settle like stones in the room. The silence was heavy, charged, until at last the judge's voice cut through. This court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the confessions placed before it. What we have seen is not a misunderstanding. What we have seen is not isolated misconduct. What we have seen is systemic abuse, orchestrated and concealed by those entrusted to serve. Her gavel struck once, sharp, and final. Effective immediately, Sheriff Robert Buckley is ordered into federal custody, pending charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Gasps rippled through the gallery as two marshals stepped forward. Buckley's face blanched. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. The marshals clasped his wrists, steel cuffs snapping where his badge once shone. For the first time in years, Buckley was no longer the one giving orders, he was the one being led away. Judge Castillo turned her gaze to Clane. Officer Richard Clane, your testimony has been noted, but it does not absolve you of accountability. You are ordered into custody as well, pending trial for assault, abuse of power, and conspiracy. This court acknowledges your cooperation but will not ignore your actions. Clane closed his eyes, shoulders sagging as the marshals approached. He didn't resist. Perhaps he had nothing left to resist with. He simply lowered his head as the cuffs closed around his wrists, and followed the path Buckley had taken moments before. The judge's voice carried on, resolute. Furthermore, the contracts binding Redwood Falls Police Department to Clarion Shield are hereby declared null and void. Effective immediately, Clarion Shield is barred from operating within this state. Federal inquiry into its practices will proceed. Danielle let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The room erupted not in cheers but in the kind of stunned silence that comes when justice finally pierces through years of rot. Reporters scribbled frantically, their phones buzzing with alerts. Activists clasped each other's hands. Some cried quietly. Judge Castillo struck her gavel once more. This ruling is not an end. A federal investigation will continue to examine the extent of this corruption. This court demands full cooperation from all involved parties. She rose, signaling the close of the session. The bailiff called for order, but the tension had already broken. Inside, people wept, embraced, whispered prayers of thanks. Outside, the news spread in waves, and the chants shifted from anger to triumph. Danielle stood, gathering her things with calm precision. She looked at Eli, who gave a small nod. The system had cracked. Now, the people could carry the weight of change forward. The courthouse doors opened, and the roar of the crowd washed in like a tide. Danielle stepped outside into the light, the chants rising to meet her. Some held candles even in the bright afternoon. Others clutched copies of the news headlines already printing Buckley's arrest. She didn't raise her hands for silence, she didn't need to. The people already understood. That evening, Danielle returned to the farmer's market. The same stalls stood where they had weeks before, but everything felt different. The flower vendor waved softly, tears glistening in her eyes. The soap seller stood tall, his voice breaking as he said, "They can't bury it anymore." Children darted between stands with snow cones and sunflowers, their laughter stitching the sound of joy back into a place once scarred. Under the oak tree, a fiddler played again, but the tune was different, slower, steadier, like a hymn of survival. People gathered not to shop, but to be together, to reclaim the ground where dignity had once been torn. Danielle walked through it quietly, her presence drawing nods and murmurs. She wasn't greeted like a hero. She was greeted like one of their own. And that was what mattered most. Near the edge of the lot, Tasha approached, the phone that had first live-streamed Danielle's arrest tucked into her pocket. Her eyes were wide but steady. She stepped close and whispered, "You really did it." Danielle crouched slightly so their eyes met. Her reply was soft but strong. "Number, we did." Tasha's lips curved into a shy smile, and for the first time since that awful day, the girl allowed herself to believe that her choice to lift her phone and stream had changed the world. Later that night, Danielle sat in her motel room one last time. The torn piece of fabric lay folded beside her laptop. She set up her phone, the red light blinking once again, and looked into the lens. "They thought ripping my dress would erase me," she said, holding the fabric gently between her fingers. What it did was uncover them. It uncovered every lie, every cover-up, every abuse they thought they could bury. She placed the fabric on the desk, her hand resting on it as though anchoring it to the moment. "This story isn't mine anymore. It belongs to every person who has ever been told to stay quiet. It belongs to the ones who never had cameras, who never had a crowd to speak for them. It belongs to the next generation that refuses to let silence be the price of survival." Her voice grew stronger, carrying through the lens. Movements don't end in courtrooms. They don't end with arrests. They live in us when we refuse to look away, when we refuse to accept humiliation as the cost of breathing free. They live every time someone chooses to speak instead of swallow their pain. She leaned forward, her eyes steady, her words measured like a vow. "They thought they could tear me down. Instead, they tore down the walls, hiding them. And now the world is watching." The live stream ended, but the echoes did not. Across the nation, in living rooms and streets, in classrooms and churches, people repeated her words, stitched them into their own stories. Danielle's humiliation had become a nation's call to action, and Redwood Falls would never again be the same.